Hey everyone! So this week I've got another very fascinating person, a good friend who I met. It must be a couple of years ago now, and we kind of connected straight away. Very very fascinating guy. I'd like to welcome my good friend Sven Lauch. Hi Sven, how are you?
Hi, Darren. Yeah, I'm very good, thank you, and thanks for having me here.
Hey, welcome to the little show that I've got going every Wednesday. Before we kind of get into it properly, it might be sort of worthwhile just to kind of play a little bit of an intro in terms of like what a lot of your story is about. So I'm just going to play a little bit of footage, and then you can have a bit of a chat and take it from there. Okay.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Reporting tonight from Berlin.
From the Berlin Wall specifically, take a look at them. They've been there since last night. They are here in the thousands. They are here in the tens of thousands. Occasionally they shout, Die Mauer muss weg, the wall must go. Thousands and thousands of West Germans come to make the point that the wall has suddenly become irrelevant. Something, as you can see, almost to party on. How do you measure such an astonishing moment in history? The East German government said tonight they were going to make more openings in the wall, at least a dozen more. Put bulldozers right through the wall so that more people could cross to the west.
So yeah, I mean, probably one of the most monumental moments in history, really. You know, the war coming on '89. So, for those people that are just kind of getting involved, just tell us your story, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, it's quite funny because I'm going to tell the story today backwards.
Okay.
So I'm trying to tell you where I come from, and then we go there because
Okay.
it is such a monumental part, But there are so many similarities to what we experience right now. I keep saying since about 2019 in January, I start saying to people, I feel more at home myself than I actually ever did. And that might sound profound, but it has not changed for me. The pandemic has been such a place of personal growth, of going deeper. It was not kind of a shocking event. It's not overwhelming emotionally or anything like this. But I had learned some skills after I had basically crashed emotionally in January 2018. I properly had crashed. I'm now 47 almost. And back then I had crashed so much. It took me sometimes 2-3 days to pick myself emotionally back together and, become a person that can engage with the world around me. And well, why did I crash? Well, the interesting thing is I found something out there, and this is what I can relate to today. It was that time when I for the very first time, had the question, does the fall of the Berlin Wall have anything to do with my emotional struggles?
Mm-hmm.
I've had never asked the question. For 28 years and a few months, I've never asked the question whether the fall of the Berlin Wall had any impact on my emotional life. And I had so many situations being overwhelmed and loads of stuff going on. So what I realized back then, and this kind of ties back to the fall of the Berlin Wall, this news feed was from the 10th of November. And you have to imagine, I woke up in the morning, my mom turned a light on in my room and said, or didn't say anything, usually didn't say anything, just turn on the light, open the door just to make sure, hey, my brother and I get up and get ready for school. But this time my mom said something weird. She said, like, the wall is open.
Wow.
And I thought, like, nah, impossible. I mean, I was 15 years old, 15 and a half.
Wow.
And I thought, like, what? No. And she said, like, no, believe me, the wall is open. It's like, can't be. And she literally said, like, go turn on the TV. We lived very close to West Germany. So we had Western TV basically I've had Western TV all my life in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I turned on the TV and it was exactly that footage in the sense, with the people standing on the wall. Just think for a moment. The
Wow.
wall was, that part of the wall that we see there is the part of the Western side. But remember, there were guards on the other side. They were ordered to shoot whoever tried to trespass.
Unimaginable.
And I was like, okay. And there was no emotions in my house. There was no joy, no stuff like that. Was like, oh, okay. And I was like, oh, wow. So I went to school. Now, imagine this. I went to school that day, and the teacher who was teaching us all about communism, we had a specific class that was teaching us all about the history of East Germany, as well as the whole Marxism, Leninism idea of communism. And that very teacher stands in front of the class and says, well, that it would collapse one day was always clear. What?
Right.
Before we were told, like, don't watch Western TV, don't do this, don't do this, don't do
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
it's dangerous, they want to destroy our country. And I mean, Honecker still said on the 7th of October, 1489, he still said, that the West wants to destroy the communism. They're just trying to get us all going. He still could not see that anything like this happened. So this is the news we received from the East. And then a month later, they opened the wall, which was not the plan that people stand on it. The plan was to let people through it, through the official ways. And suddenly people stand on the wall, come there with hammer and chisel. I mean,
it's amazing.
It's
I'm
amazing.
sending a bit of a shout out to a few people, Sven, because we've got people really interested in listening to you. We've got Matthew Stephen. Hey, how are you? John Lingard, please have you on board. My good friend Gary Witt, who you're going to meet at some point in Plymouth, Sven. Benjamin, Deborah Shepherd, Janet Morrison, Linda Jones, Darren Chaplin, Matt Clifton, Mikey Crowder. Thanks for commenting. Anybody got any questions along the way for Sven? I'm sure I'll be happy to answer them. So Dean Callahan's just jumped on. Sorry to interrupt you, Sven. Yeah, you carry on, because obviously people are fascinated.
No, that's fine. But the funny thing is, at that day and on that day at school, there was two things happening right on that day. One was, my worldview is a lie. I believed in communism. My dad was a communist secretary of the Communist Party at the workplace where he worked. My mom was actually a teacher before, and she used to run for a few years the communist youth movement in school. So for me, my parents were communists. I was following in their footsteps in what I believed, And now the teacher sends us all rubbish. And we, of course, started learning very quickly it was. And then I had a career plan. I knew what I wanted to do. I had a very clear career plan. Okay, 1 year, this is the last year in this village at school. Then I go to the next city, do my A-levels. And this was confirmed, okay? This was how we communists plan. This was confirmed stuff. I knew I go to the next city, do my A-levels, and then I go to the army and become a software engineer. So I had a 25-year plan that vanished overnight.
Overnight, yeah. Wow.
And then my parents, 2 weeks later, I think, they said, like, Sven, we have to talk. And this was probably the hammer kind of part, that they suddenly told me that everything they had created, all this life that I experienced, was actually made up under the pressure of the secret police, because my granddad on my dad's side was arrested by the Soviet Union as a dissident. And what not many people know, and now is a little bit of history lesson, Buchenwald, for instance, the very famous concentration camp, was a death camp by the Nazis, was still used by the Russians until 1950.
Was it really?
So my granddad was released there, handed over to the government, went through the Waldheim trials, which included not just the Nazis, but it included also the dissidents, with trials that were fixed before. They went on for 45 minutes, and then my granddad was jailed for, I think, 10 years.
Wow.
And that type of story was never to be passed on to anybody. And that was kind of where my parents suddenly opened up. And I was like, I don't even know who my family is. So by Christmas 1989, my worldview is a lie. My worldview is a lie. My career plan is gone. And I don't even know who the people that I love and live with really are and what they really believe.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Matthew just put a question on, what was it like to cross the wall for the very first time, Sven?
I remember that day actually very, very strongly, but not actually for the actual crossing of the wall. What I remember actually of this day is there was a really weird thunderstorm. It was really sunny. one moment, and literally in 2 minutes there was a black cloud over us. It just rained so heavily and really, really badly, but then we were kind of soaked, and then it stopped. And it was like, what was this all about? So, but the actual crossing over, which was during a holiday with my parents, I think probably in February 1990, but it was, I don't know, it was not really interesting. Because I lived close to the border to West Germany, that crossing is much more memorable because we basically lived close to Marienborn, where the A2, the motorway from Hanover to Berlin, went through. So that was one of the transit ways for the West Germans to go to West Berlin. And we lived very close there, but there was another village which was directly at the border. And what they had done there was just cut the fence apart. And there was an old road, which was, of course, soil. It was just a like a farmer's road across a field, literally. And they'd opened this fence there, secured it so far that we could cross. And that's where we walked over. So we had to walk for 22 kilometers from one to the other. So it was a bit more than a mile. We had to cross over on foot. So we literally walked through the strip of the fence. And that was a weird experience.
Wow. Yeah.
And I remember the first time walking into a co-op in Germany. We have a similar thing like here. And the most important thing that struck me was the color.
Yeah.
Everything was like lit with color. There was so much bright color, like really, one of the colors I really remember is this bright yellow. There was such a bright yellow color there that, branding in East Germany was rather dull in a sense of color. It was not black and white, but they would always have more subtle colors. But there you had
film noir, isn't it? Almost, it's almost like you're in a black and white film, I guess.
Yeah. So that was really a deeply memorable thing to do. And then, of course, West Germany had at this time a law of so-called welcome money for East Germans who would go on holiday in West Germany, which was just the old people were allowed actually to apply for a visa to go over. And when they did, the East German government prevented them from taking money. So they could only take 15 East German mark to cross the border with. So they would cross the border for holiday and have no money. And what the West German government had done was they basically had a law in place that each one of us, whoever comes over for holiday, can just claim 100 Deutschmark.
Right.
Okay. And that's what people did. Now you suddenly have this law in place, and millions of East Germans cross the border, and everybody claims 100 Deutschmark. So those are the memories I have, like going to the post office and just claim we were 4 people in the family, so we claimed 400 Deutschmark. We just got it given by the government.
I think it's one of those things that people often think about, people that have grew up in that sort of regime, or maybe even thinking back to, like the wartime, that kind of oppressiveness. And some of the things you've come out with are things that I wouldn't have even considered. Like you spoke about the color, like as a person thinking about that period in time, it's not something, unless you were there, that you'd even consider the fact that everything was it seems more colorful. And again, anybody got any questions for Sven? Just a quick shout out to a few people. Andy Jennings, Christina, hey, how are you? Good friend Laura's on watching us. Good friend Sylvia. All right, Sylvia and John, how are you? Just one of the things I'm interested in is, prior to the wall coming down, Sven, like what was the level of almost like, were you literally, as you're walking around, was it kind of as I guess people kind of see these war films with the Nazis, like saying papers thing? It sounds a bit of a stereotype, but was the kind of oppressiveness that like that? Was it almost like you were challenged all the time by the authorities, or was it not like that? What's the myths and what's the truth?
What's the myth and what's the truth? I think that depends how old you are.
Right.
To basically start with. So for me as a 15-year-old, I actually didn't know anything about that at all. There was no knowledge.
Right.
For me, in my growing up, I grew up in a very safe country. There was never a fear that anybody would steal your bike. That might have happened, but that was how far theft would go in some sense, But there was an extremely safe culture. I think even with crime, I know they were covered up loads of things. I know the documentaries now, but in general, there was just very little of those kind of things happening. So for me as a child, from the child perspective, it was a perfect country to live in. There was no food shortages. So often things see the food shortages as one of the things that we would have had in communism, but that wasn't like that in East Germany, not at the time that I lived.
Right.
So you could always get meat at the butchers. You could always buy bread. There were no shortages of that kind of things. And there was very cheap housing. You have to imagine with the money that we make today in the UK, where the minimum wage is, I think, probably about 1,300 net income. So you would have to imagine now you would only pay for your nicely sized flat for your family with a bedroom for the children. For 2 children, you would most of the time have 1 bedroom, but if you have more, they would have 2 bedrooms for the children.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived in a 2-bedroom flat with my parents, and my parents paid, if we put all the inflation in there, compared to the income what they had, about £100 a month. That was including everything. Okay, there was warm, there was heat, there was water, everything was covered with these £100. So housing was extremely cheap, food was extremely cheap, and as I said, there was a lot of security around. Now, I know, of course, now the story of my parents, and that's a very, very different one. Because my parents knew that our phone was bugged.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Was everyone's phone bugged? Or just specific people?
Well, as I said, my parents had that kind of specific story that was never be able to pass on. So my parents were 24/7 watched. My mom still, they're now in their 70s. My mom still, if she's followed by a car for too long, she just pulls aside and let the car pass.
Wow.
So things like that. And so they were followed by cars. They would go in a restaurant, and very quickly somebody would join the table or wanted to join the table, and things like this. And my dad, he was a microelectronic engineer, so he knew stuff. So one of the things that my dad told me, like when they received the telephone, after 2 weeks they had moved into the flat, they received a telephone. In East Germany, people didn't have a telephone after 20 years.
Yeah.
Applying for one. My parents had one after 2 weeks, which, first of all, people thought my parents were from the Stasi. So this was a rumor going around about our family. But the other thing was that my dad took the phone, unscrewed it, opened it, and saw, there's a cable in there that doesn't belong there. So he just cut the cable, closed the phone, and within 2 or 3 days, the postman stands on the door and says, like, our phone's broken.
Wow. Amazing.
So my parents 100% knew they were watched, and I know for a fact that they are watched because I actually applied for some files, and I know that my granddad definitely had files, so I'm 100% sure my parents had files. Wow. And it was like crazy, but my parents lived with this constant pressure of things, and then they tried to guide them into certain positions. So that's how my dad became basically the party secretary. He was basically kind of pushed into this thing with always the promise they would keep the family alone and leave the children alone, because they were threatened. They lose the children if they don't go with it. So for my parents, different story.
Wow. Well, then, you got any questions for Sven? Because obviously it's fascinating what he's talking about. Andy Jackson, or no, Jax says on my screen. Sharon McDonald, Daniela, Bradley Goodwin, John Bett, and Leslie. Anybody got any questions for Sven before he kind of continues? And Evan Gillespie's just jumped on as well. Pleased to have you on board. So I'm guessing, like, what was the kind of the next sort of significant point in your life then for you? What was the kind of next significant point that maybe came up for you? Maybe, I don't know, career, although you thought, or as you think back now, what do you think was the next sort of milestone for you, Sven?
Well, one of the milestones was, of course, I suddenly had to figure out what I want to do. And in the end, I actually stepped into my granddad's footsteps, because my granddad on one side was a banker and the other one was a banker too, under the kind of in the Third Reich kind of time. So, and I did that step, and there was some funny things going on. I was in East Germany, and of course they had to suddenly train all these East German employees to be free market people who have to sell things, who have to bring a product towards a customer and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed that, but I became really a kind of a problem causer, simply because, when they said like, hey, we want to sell this product or push this product, I would do it. But then I was just a apprentice, so I couldn't make contracts, so I had to go to somebody who can, and then they wouldn't take my customer. They would just say, oh, why is it always me? Why is it always me that I have to do this stuff? I have enough to do. And I was like, what's this? I mean, the client is already sold to. Just fill in some paperwork, And for me, this was weird. But so I had this reputation of probably being pushy, and it's something that carried on in my life. But a really breakthrough moment, a really big one, connected also to my story, was in 1999. I had an experience with a leader who I told him about some experience and some things I think, and then he told me, oh, I thought this too, but then I went to this kind of school, and they really showed us this is just simply not right. It's not the right thing to think, and you should think it like this. And I sat there and I was like, wait a minute. You had your own opinion about something, then you went to a school where they told you that this is the wrong opinion, and you just changed opinion. And I didn't ask them that. That was just what was going on inside me. And I realized something. I have actually never made up my own opinion.
Ah, right.
My opinion was always based on available opinions around me. And I would basically align myself to the one that I think is the most convenient or the most aligned with me. But I've never had that moment of actually collecting information and then trying to make up an opinion that is completely based on my own discernment. And that was a wake-up call, because I realized, like, wait a minute, this is what happened to me at school. We were told things. And then I suddenly, one day stand at school, the teacher had basically lied to us.
Yeah. Experience wasn't consistent with what they told you.
So I basically made this crazy decision to almost reject education to a certain extent, but to question everything, to look behind everything. I explored all kinds of things like conspiracy theories, and you suddenly, when you become open and you want to discover, you discover weird things, And one of the things, for instance, because we live in this type of age of conspiracy theory, so much so, I learned something about them. And one of the things I learned about them, they are just extremely well communicated. They are so well thought through. And if they have a video, they are so perfectly, like the pearls on a chain is perfectly chained up. And it sounds so convincing. And they keep claiming, there's one sentence that goes through this, one concept that goes through conspiracy theory, and that is, oh, somebody wants to box you in. Somebody wants to put you into the box and doesn't want you to know this. So continually you're told, like, people want to put you into the box. But the funny thing is, I discovered that this is exactly how conspiracy theories build a box around you.
Yeah, it always works.
Okay? It works every time. You just have to tell somebody there's an enemy. And this is what we experienced. I mean, I lived 15 kilometers from the western border. So we were told the people 15 kilometers away on the other side of the fence are our enemy. Okay, I started understanding this concept. As soon as somebody is always pointing the finger and says, like, there's an enemy, 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 without ever taking any responsibility and talking about where they're coming from, what is about them, then I'm getting...
So to interrupt you, what was the relationship like between, like, other normal people on the street then? So if you went into West Germany, would there be this high level of suspicion then, or was it did it take quite a long time for people to kind of begin to build trust, or what was that like? Just even going into shops and things like that as an East German, what was the kind of dynamic like? If that makes sense.
I think there was too much trust, actually. We believed in this kind of beautiful freedom world that just wants your best and wants to give you everything and wants to give you all the opportunities. And there were loads of West Germans, who often were failed salespeople in the West or had failed business people in the West, and they just moved over to East Germany, and then did all their pitches, and the people were just so willing to buy and to just absorb everything and believe everything that were told. There was so much corruption, or not corruption, but so much lying going on. So many people lost so much money for nothing. They were just sold stuff. And of course, we were just told, this is how you do it, this is how you do it, this is how you do it. And people just believed, And so, I mean, there's one story I went through myself on the street. I remember this. There was on the street, I did my A-levels, so there was 3 years after the Berlin Wall coming down. On the street, a guy approaches me and said, like, hey, we'd love to give you a free magazine. You just have to sign here some paper, and then we're going to send you a free magazine. And I believed it. Guess what I did? I subscribed to a magazine.
Right.
To pay for. So at some point, after I had to receive 3 or 4, I get an invoice to pay.
Very naughty.
Okay, and I mean, I was lucky. I had a dad who knew kind of the reunification contract and all the kind of stuff. He knew the law. He could write a letter like a lawyer, even though he wasn't. But he could just write a letter back and says, like, this was not right done. This was the paragraph why it's not done right, and you just have to cancel this. And they did. I never had to pay that invoice, but that's the kind of stuff that went on, you know, continuously. So we were literally abused by the people who suddenly saw the chance of making the quick buck. And that's our first experience of the West.
Kind of racketeering almost, isn't it? I think out of every, would you agree? It's almost like in the war as well. You had these people selling like things black market, or I think out of every sort of crisis, out of every sort of thing that happens in life, there seems to be a faction of society that kind of does well off it. While the majority are probably struggling, there's always a segment that seems to do very well off it, and maybe that's similar, like racketeering almost, isn't it? Like abusing that trust. So what was the next kind of thing that had an impact on you, Sven? What was the next sort of significant point? I know you were speaking about 1999 and that period, and at what point did you begin to feel, that you'd kind of come into your own, if that makes sense, like you'd kind of discovered what your passion was?
I mean, this was basically, as I mentioned before, I had this emotional crash in 2018, and I got introduced to kind of a really systematic method of dealing with emotions. And I didn't have a counselor or a therapist. I really just learned a very systematic method to do this. And it's basically grieving. And one of the core questions we asked there is like, what have you lost? And that's, as I said, like, this was the first time I had this suddenly question. I was like, wonder if the fall of the Berlin Wall has anything to do with that. And that was like in 2018, I think in August or June, July, in that kind of time, I suddenly became aware. I lost my worldview, I lost my career plan, and I lost my the identity about my parents. And I suddenly like, oh, wait a minute. Why didn't I not kick off? Because this is massive stuff. I mean, everything that was a pillar in my life just had disappeared. Why did I not completely go in rebellion as a teenager? Why did I not just stand up and throw things around and don't believe anybody anymore? And I just wondered, like, what was going on there with me? And I had also watched Brené Brown's TED Talk about the power of vulnerability. And she says something very interesting in that TED Talk, that we cannot selectively feel. So if we think about a certain situation, we will always feel the good and the bad, or we feel nothing. So we can decide whether to feel or not, but we can't decide what to feel.
Right. Yeah.
And I suddenly realized I have no emotional connection to that time. For me, everything I knew was nothing more than knowledge. I was told by my parents. I had never any curiosity to ask my grandparents or my grandma about this time, or my parents during all those years. I've never had any curiosity to find out more at all. It was just a fact in my life, like a history book. And I realized, like, something is wrong here. What is this? And then I realized I was so emotionally traumatized by all this overwhelm that I just switched off feeling.
Yeah.
And I had those moments over and over again in life where, the last time when that happened in 2017, when I wanted to start a business with someone, and I had basically the same experience multiple times before, in a sense of, I had an idea, I had a plan, I put it all together, I had some really cool stuff. I stand on the launch pad, get completely emotionally overwhelmed, and walk off. So, and then 2017, at the end of the year, that was the last time that actually happened. where I basically just afterwards I just crashed, and I felt I lost the will to live almost. I just said like, so if this is all, then sorry, can't do this. So in that year, I became aware of my story, because I suddenly began to really look into those things and rebuild emotional connection to this. And that was in August 2018 where I decided I need to tell my story. So it was kind of in that time when I realized, like, I want to tell my story. And then, regarding November came, and I was suddenly like, oh, wait a minute. Next year's the 30th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down. So 2019, I want to tell my story on that year, on that very day.
I'm just going to carry on with that, Sven. Sorry, I'm just going to invite anybody just to jump in and give us any sort of any sort of observations or questions I want to ask you at this point, or any, if you guys have been through something similar and want to kind of just share that. I'll just do a few shout outs to Leon, Scott, Hannah Matkin, Lars Hibbert, Jeremy Gascoigne, Paul Ferguson. Thanks for jumping on. So again, Sven is such a fascinating guy. He won't bite, I promise. You can ask him anything you like, or share an experience.
Please do, yeah.
Please do. Feel free to post a comment. Sorry to interrupt you, Sven.
Hey, don't worry. So, and then that time when I said, I started grieving. So I started looking into those losses and what have I lost, and what does that mean? And one of the things of losses, when you start naming them, one of the most beautiful parts of naming losses is you only feel something you lost if you valued it in the first place. Yeah. So it becomes connected to your values. Now, I read Brené Brown's book as part of a leadership management course, Dare to Lead, which basically came out 2018 in October, right at the time when I started my course. So I bought that book and read it. And one of the things she said there was, we can't live into values that we can't name. And I thought, like, oh, I know quite a few of my values. I'm quite aware of a lot of my values, actually. So I felt like really proud, yeah, I know what I'm doing, And then she starts explaining, no, it's core values. You really need to know deeply what your core values are, which of you have two. And I thought, like, nah, never, ever, ever, will I give up any of my values. I mean, they're called values for a reason, So
Absolutely.
never, ever. Well, they're too important for me. The loyalty, commitment, things like this, honesty, they're too important. I will not give any of those up. So I'm not willing to go anywhere like that. And of course, she suggests on the next page, okay, your 100 values, and think of the ones that are really important to you. And then you have probably 10 to 15 ending up with from those 100 she mentions. And then you just have to sit over them and find out which are the ones that you really feel about. What are the foundational ones? And I asked myself a weird question. Which of all the values that I value am I willing to sacrifice under pressure? Now, that was a very interesting question. And somebody else just told me another question that you could ask is, which of all those values on that list would you be willing to die for? Okay, it's a similar question, but I suddenly had realized something, that I put on the value curiosity that I have never, ever named in my life. Actually, I had named that value on that list because I knew it's true, but for me, this was the most natural thing to do. This was like, everybody does it, doesn't it? Isn't it that everybody's completely full curiosity and wants to ask all the questions? I just thought, like, isn't it the most natural thing? And that's why I suddenly realized it's not. Actually, most of my frustrations I have had with leaders, for instance, came from, I was curious, I started asking questions, I started pushing boundaries, I started seeing things from a different perspective. And people just like, stop asking questions. Can you just get on with this? This is how we do it here. Just get on with it.
Challenge it.
And everything inside me stands up and says, no. And that's why I realized that. And that was my breakthrough moment, that I suddenly looked back into my life through the lens of curiosity and realized, like, my life makes sense. A lot of my frustrations and pains that I experienced, they make complete sense. And this was like, wow. So, January 2019, a year after I fell apart, I stood there and thought, like, I feel more at home in myself than I ever did.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I really broke through all this and realized, this learning to think, which I did from 1999. Another thing I had to learn was to learn conflict. to learn to love conflict, to see the opportunity in conflict.
So that's a
Not
really
just the
concept,
not just the
because
external.
avoiding it, Sven, don't they? So I'm really this is going to be really fascinating to see how you kind of approach this.
Yeah, so the one thing with conflict was very interesting. There's so beautiful, because we had a mentor. We came to the UK, and honestly, the UK has been a lifesaver to both my wife and me, simply because we could leave the culture, we could leave everything behind, we could just, kind of come into an area where we were forced to think in a different way, to see things from a different perspective. And when we came here the first time in 2005 for our honeymoon, we had basically decided we're going to do a year, go away into an English-speaking country. We had chosen the UK. Long story how we got to Plymouth, so I'm not going to tell the long story, but we ended up in Plymouth and met a beautiful mentor here. And he said to us, "How many arguments do you guys have?" Like, we were married for 4 weeks or 5 when he asked that question. And I thought, like, I'm really embarrassed, because actually we argue every week really badly, like at least one big one every week, And so he looked at me and laughed and said, Sven, no, I think you guys don't have enough conflict. And everything inside me was like, this guy is mental. I mean, this is the weirdest thing to say. I hate conflict. I hate the arguments.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then he started sharing and said, like, you know what? A conflict situation is the opportunity to learn about yourself. It's an opportunity to learn about the other person. It's an opportunity to actually connect deeper and to really ask questions and see each other's differences and to appreciate each other's differences and to learn to complement each other. And this was a completely new concept to me, to see this emotionally charged stuff that I just hated with a passion suddenly could be an opportunity to live. But I think this was so important, even for me to ask the question in the end, which of all the values would I sacrifice under pressure? I think I could only ask a question because I had learned to appreciate conflict. Absolutely. And to be willing to go into this inner conflict and actually ask the question. So, but yeah, it's a mind-blowing thing to do, and I can only recommend, if with the right skills, conflict. Somebody recently on LinkedIn said, like, oh, there's good conflict and bad conflict, and I say, like, that's actually not true. All conflict is good. How we handle it might not be.
And I just let people know this is what you do now for a business, isn't it? This is sort of you're into companies and help with this kind of stuff. Can you kind of elaborate how that you went from that point and then sort of turning it into a business, Sven? Could you tell us about the transition from that into a business?
It basically became a natural progression in some sense. I had basically experienced during my career in businesses those managers, that couldn't deal with my curiosity, that I suddenly understood why those frustrations came. But I also could see very clearly that they took all things personally. I would say, like, hey, how about we change this in a business? Or how about, we could do this differently? Or how about we could do something here? And they would just say, like, if you want to change, don't come here and just change a company. We've been running for so many years and stuff like this. And you could just see they were feel personally attacked. They couldn't even hear what I had to say. I didn't want their job. I didn't want their business.
But we've always done it like this,
Yeah.
This way.
And so I realized very quickly that I had learned to be confident with conflict, to raise conflict and stuff like this. And I realized, like, most people are not. And they're actually feeling threatened. Now, having come from this inner conflict, which then, of course, really became aware of through my personal crashing, I realized that actually most external conflict that we struggle with has nothing to do with the conflict between you and somebody else, or with you and the world around you. All the conflict has its root, and why we struggle to handle with the conflict that we have inside. And that's kind of why I knew, like, I want to go there. I have found a way to dig deep into myself, to really found foundations, to feel happy, even in a pandemic, and know, like, you know what? I'm feeling still at home in myself, and I'm still peacefully from the inside out. Yeah, there are challenges around me, but that doesn't change who I am.
Mm.
And that is kind of the stuff that I realized, like, I want to bring into businesses. I want to bring teams to the place where the team members, the managers, are confident in themselves. They don't have to protect themselves anymore. They don't have to fight people off. They know who they are. They know where their boundaries are. They know where their strengths and weaknesses are. And now, in their emotional intelligence, they are able to handle the difference between me and somebody else. And this is the power. I mean, I see it in my family running. My wife and my relationship has shifted since I've learned those kind of skills. I mean, really shifted. We have, the last 2 years have been absolutely mind-blowing in how our marriage went into depth. And also when I help people, I had just recently a small business owner and completely overwhelmed, didn't know what to do. And I just posted it today on my private Facebook. She gave me 2 emails that I combined, and one was kind of, thank you for giving me the confidence to be more assertive, and the other one was like, it's a new beginning for me. And this was like, wow. So somebody, I could unlock somebody who was emotionally completely overwhelmed, couldn't do anything anymore, and now she's standing and she wants to grow her business and works closely with somebody together and feels confidence in raising issues and moving forward. And this was like, yes, that makes me happy.
I'll just put this out there. I mean, is anybody that's watching now that's maybe in business, or even on a personal level, that has felt overwhelmed, because let's face it, it's been, I'm the first one to admit, Sven, that, during the first sort of 6 months of lockdown, I mean, I'm, as a psychologist, I'm trained to handle emotions and help other people. The idea is I help other people and guide them out of their turmoil. But, I was completely overwhelmed through it. I should have rang you up long before. So, just curious if anybody else is out there that's, maybe brave enough, or you can also send a private message to us. Maybe you either gone through it and you came out of it, you found sort of a strategy yourself, or maybe you found a way of getting out of that, or you're in it now. So maybe you guys have experienced something, or maybe you do find yourself in conflict with certain people and you want to maybe make a change. Sven's the man to ask on this. Just curious, going back to what you said, Sven, about working with companies, what do you feel is, or where did the kind of reluctance stem from, or where do you find it stems from with some of your clients? So does it come from ego? Does it come from a fear? Or where do you think the kind of that inertia maybe comes from, that reluctance from some of your clients initially?
I mean, some of the reluctance to even look into the emotional side of stuff begins with mostly the business owner don't know themselves, and they don't want to have their team trained to deal with stuff because they don't know. There's also an unawareness that comes with that, and it's an unawareness that there's a different way of doing things. And that is one of the things that I keep experiencing. There are sentences how I've seen business owners and managers and most of the public trying to help each other. I hate, for instance, sentences like, it's okay to not be okay. If you say this to me, if I'm not okay, the only thing I feel is rejection. Right. And the reason is because I don't want to feel not okay. I want to feel okay. I want to have help to become okay again. Sure. So if you tell me it's okay to not be okay, it's like, it's a rejection. It's not a help. It's not an encouragement. Yeah. It's just imagine the picture, you go through the moors, like we have Dartmoor just around the corner, you go through the moors, somebody's literally stuck in the moor, and you would just say, like, it's okay to be stuck in the moor. No, it's not. No,
exactly.
And that was one of the things where I said, like, no, we have to learn to do these things different. But how? We have never learned this. We have never learned how to deal with the emotion, and that's the problem in the business. The challenge that I hear over and over again what business owners do right now, if somebody's overwhelmed, it's like, okay, so we give them a kind of a special place where they can just be alone. And if they can't really work properly, then, we give them the freedom to be okay and not work as much. Just imagine you pay them. They have zero productivity. There's nothing going on right now. There's nothing that they contribute to the business. And yes, I understand that you want to be a kind, nice business owner. You want to be perceived as somebody's helpful, but in the end, it's just not good for your business, and it's not good for the person. And it's not helping them to move forward. But there are no resources. People don't have the resources to do that. And that's basically where I come in, where I want to help. I train a skill.
Sure.
I don't train psychology,
Yeah. So let's say there is somebody out there, maybe somebody's a bit reluctant to share in the open forum. I mean, they can always contact me, or obviously we're going to put your contact details at the end, Sven. And they can maybe sort of reach out to you. But what would be your maybe top, not trying to simplify the process, but what would be your kind of the top tips if you've got an individual out there, maybe there is a sole trader, they're on their own as a business owner, or just as a regular person that they're feeling completely overwhelmed, or maybe they I mean, I know that I read some research about, say, for example, not so much domestic violence, but conflict within families, because we're all on this lockdown and people are spending this unusual amount of time together. I mean, it's always a joke, isn't it? Like, say, Christmas, that families, they go together for 2 or 3 days. When I was a policeman, right, the amount of calls that we had at Christmas time, people fell out because people generally can't spend more than 2 or 3 days together with, that they may be cooped up in a house with the family member they don't get on with. But this is everyone's worst nightmare. Maybe they're in a situation where, there is a lot of conflict going on, not making light of the situation. But what would be your sort of maybe a few top tips in terms of what someone can do maybe right now to begin to think differently, in terms of if they are feeling overwhelmed, what would be some useful ways to maybe begin that process?
So the kind of simplified way of the method I use is, to start with is just make sense of your emotions. Now, to do that that's the first step, make sense of your emotions. Name the emotions that you feel. But in order to do this, there's something that needs to be in place, and that's what we call a safe place. You need an emotionally safe place. That can be 3 things, and this is where it becomes interesting. Can be a physical place, so it could be going for a walk with a dog, could be a physical room in your house, could be actually a specific chair that you like to sit into and where you kind of really feel calm down. So it's a physical place. It could be a relationship, so you have a safe relationship with someone that you just know. I can pick up the phone and I immediately can have a good psychological or emotionally safe conversation. I can just come up with whatever comes out. And the third one could be kind of a frame of mind. So it's kind of, you're the person who goes through prayer or yoga or whatever you're going to use to just calm yourself and bring yourself into an emotionally safe place inside. So this is a very important thing. And especially if you think about dynamics or family dynamics where things go out of hand very quickly. Number one is you have a right to set boundaries. You have a right to remove yourself and look for safety. So that is the absolute number one. And if you're as a business owner, you have somebody having problems and being overwhelmed, the first thing you should just do is create a space where they can feel emotionally safe. So maybe you have a room where you can go or things like this. Create emotional safety first. Right. What you do in that emotional safe place is 2 things. So we try to make sense of the emotions. What are we feeling? What is actually going on? And the second thing is, and this is where my method becomes very practical and very much connected to the logic side of things, is we actually want to make a plan how to move forward. So we don't want to just react to the emotion. We want to actually find out why this is there and how can we respond to the emotion to move forward. And this is the step 2. What we basically do is we ask a question. And I've said this to many people, when they want a quick tip, this is my quick tip. If they have the number 1 tip, second step of my method is the quick tip. Begin to ask that question. What are you afraid of losing? Because we react because there's something we value that we feel like is under threat. There's something that we might lose and we don't want to lose it. And the beauty of this question is it pierces through all the inner walls. You either completely reject the question, so you basically just don't want to talk at all.
Mhm.
That can happen. But for the people who really respond to the question, you suddenly go through all the levels into the very depth of the people's hearts by just asking the question. Because suddenly things will come up, like, I feel like I have no confidence, or I have lost somebody in my family, or I'm afraid of losing somebody in my family, or as a business owner, it could be I'm afraid of losing my job. This is information you can actually handle, do something about.
Mm.
Okay, if the person just says I'm feeling overwhelmed, there's nothing we can do. But
Absolutely.
if we come to the losses, or in a family, why is that? And often the fear of conflict is we don't want to be seen as bad. We don't want to be seen as being offensive. And so we try to be peacemakers, so we lose the confidence of like, things like this I've heard many times, like lose privacy. Or my wife used to say, like, she's a very independent woman, and she said, like, I feel like I have no permission to take time for myself. It was one of the things she put in her list. And this was when did this list with her. This was the breakthrough moment when I realized her independence is the very thing that empowers our connection. If I help her to take that time and support her to take this time for herself, I have more relationship with her than I ever did before, and I never knew, I knew, but I perceived it completely wrong before. For me, it was like, independence doesn't work in a relationship. Please, we can't be independent in a relationship. That doesn't work. That was my perception. But when I saw the losses, I realized that has nothing to do with me. It's not about rejecting me. It's about her needing this time to charge. And this was like, wow. Okay. So what are we afraid of losing? And that's where our values come in. The things we value, and underneath those things we value are our personal values. And that's the place that I would love to take people to, and that might need help, to have somebody who looks through your losses and helps you to see, like, oh, wait a minute. Not, as I said to my wife, independence was not on a list. Well, I just looked on the list and I was like, sounds like the value of independence.
Mm.
And she said, like, oh, Sven, I tried to tell you this for many years, but you always said I can't be independent. So she felt like a fraud. So this whole thing of not doing it caused me to manipulate her by saying that she can't be independent, and she felt like a fraud and never stood up for herself. Now, we were now able to rectify that. But this is what happens with people. So we go through this. And the third step is make a plan.
Yeah.
Now we know the losses, and look for the easiest one. So, for instance, if somebody's afraid of losing their job, and the company is fine and the person is not going to lose their job, then make a plan with them and show them that they're not going to lose their job. Can you give them a plan how to deal with this fear, but show them a way how they can rectify that. Or if you have a friend who's afraid of losing their job, and you feel like probably not, encourage this person to go to their boss and say, like, I'm really overwhelmed and I can't cope, but one of the things I'm really struggling with, I feel like I'm afraid of losing my job. And if the person suddenly says, like, hey, come on, no, don't worry, we're going to take care of all this and there's no worry, just imagine the energy is freed up. And this is how I deal with everything. I deal with the whole pandemic. I ask myself what I'm losing. One of the biggest things I miss is hugs. I do miss hugs with strangers, like not strangers, but with people that I know well, and I love just having hugs and face-to-face conversations.
Contact, isn't it, that we're all missing at the moment?
But I'm emotionally aware, and I'm willing to be emotionally aware, because it's like there are other things I can deal with, so I can hold that tension that I really kind of miss. But lots of other things I knew, like when I had just recently, again, one of those moments of, I had created a workshop and nobody had turned up. I did a free workshop online. Nobody turned up. I had 5 people signed up. Nobody came. And I was like really down. In me, everything crashed. And I was like, oh, well, am I wrong with marketing? Did I do this wrong? Why does it not work? And then I took my cards out. We used the cards. I took the cards out, just put my own card pattern in front of me, and I suddenly could see something. My own trauma from my from my Berlin Wall experience of losing my dream was so deeply embedded in my loss list. This was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm afraid of losing my business. I'm afraid of losing my dream again. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. This is my trauma demons. There's an old story reappearing here. And I could make a conscious emotional decision with my mind and let it go.
Trauma.
It's an old story.
So I picked up on that trauma demons, that expression you use. It's quite powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of the stuff that I want to do with people, like you know, and maybe something that helps maybe people to memorize what I try to do is like I use a metaphor. I have this little spring, which is actually a suspension spring.
Yeah.
But when you look on the top of it, it just is a circle. You know, you go round and round and round, and that's how we often feel. We feel like we're going round and round and round. We are full of joy, something happens, we go through this grief point and I really hate it and just try to very quickly come back to joy. So we just put it all in denial, don't want to deal with it, just get on with stuff, you know, and come out the other end with some type of joy, which is very often getting more and more superficial. Now, what I teach people is, how about we make this? So we come from joy, go through the disappointment, but we're going to use the energy down here.
Yeah, use that momentum.
Discover who we are, what I value, create new decisions to create something new from it, to move forward in life and actually create a movement of personal growth. Okay, that's what I teach people. It's like I teach people basically to create this growth spiral instead of an emotional trap.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Thank you for that, Sven. That's very powerful. Has anybody got any comments for Sven? Because I know we've just got a few minutes left on the broadcast. Just going to say a few hellos to a few people. Scott Ryan Summers, Leon Benwell, Tom Pike, Ashley Colley, Joe Marvin. Hey Joe, how are you? Hokum Smokum, that's a good name, isn't it? Hokum Smokum. Julie Wallace, hi Julie, how are you? Anthony Sim, Shirley, I'll be in touch. Torsbat, Anne Ahan, I'm not sorry I've been in touch. I'll message you, I promise. Kevin Murphy and Natasha. So obviously, I guess like one of the things that you did, which really proud of you, was, if people don't know about TED is a global kind of platform for speakers of every kind of topic. It's very prestigious, and was it back in the 2019 that you did that, Sven? You did the TED talk.
9th of November 2019.
Yeah, and I sort of, I'm okay for 5 or 10 minutes if you are. Do you want to just talk about your impressions of doing the TED talk, because it's quite a big thing to be asked to do, isn't it?
It's quite a big thing to ask to do, and I mean, I know many people apply, they don't get through, and you can basically apply. Anybody can pitch their talk to become a TEDx talk speaker. I think I was probably quite lucky in that sense, but I had this dream. I wanted to tell my story on that very day, and in the end, the German embassy didn't respond to me at all. So I tried a few museums if they might do an event, and they didn't want to do anything. So kind of a museum with a piece of the Berlin Wall in England, and nobody was up for it or didn't get any response. And I just thought like that one day, like, maybe, I wonder if there's a TED talk on that day in the United Kingdom. So I went literally on the website of TED.com, looked for the event on the 9th of November, which were 2 on that day. One was in Sheffield. So I clicked on the links through, and the Sheffield ones still were open looking for speakers. So I just typed in my stuff. And 2 weeks later, I got a confirmation that I was accepted. I was like, oh, wow. I didn't expect that to happen, but this was awesome.
Hey.
But otherwise, those events, quite honestly, there are just events as anybody else's events. It's a lot of the brand that is behind there. And I think that is where the big perception comes from, is just it's a massive brand. It's very well collected and curated, those events. They're really selective who they let speak and what kind of subject they let people speak. I tried basically to apply for another one recently or twice, and I got rejected both times. So just to let you know, it's not that you have done it once and no doors was open. It's simply not that way. But I think the main thing for me from this experience, my talk didn't go viral or anything like this. But for me, the main thing is I have always an easy way to connect people to me because I tell my life story. I always have an invitation and say like, hey, if you want to know more about me, just go and watch my TEDx. And the response I get from people is every time the same thing. They're like, wow, what a story. What is this all about?
I'm not just saying this because you're my friend, but it is genuinely fascinating. I mean, I watched it again yesterday, having not watched it for a few months, but I watched it again, and it is fascinating. And I think a lot of people are fascinated by that period in history as well. Just a quick question: have you got a piece of the Berlin Wall?
I do not have a piece of the Berlin Wall. I missed that. As I said, like I was so traumatized. There's so many things. Like my grandma, I lost my grandma in 2002, I think.
Oh, sorry,
and it's so sad for me to kind of know, she was for so many years alive, and I had no emotional hunger to want to know more about her life, about my granddad's life, and how this was for her to actually see my granddad being arrested and all that kind of stuff. I have no first-hand stories told of that because it's so sad, It's like, but it's just the way it was, and that's what trauma does. And I think with COVID, we have to be very careful. This is the long-term effect of trauma. We just completely lock it out. We we get emotionally overwhelmed in certain situations without knowing why, without ever connecting it back to 2000 or to 2020 or 2021.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just in bring sort of drawing things together. Again, it was original plan sort of before COVID kicked in, but one of the things that I do is obviously an events called inspirational events, where I have inspirational speakers come along, and obviously once things settle down and COVID restrictions lift, I will be coming obviously to Plymouth, and again, for people that are in the southwest, you are very much top of my list to be one of the speakers, Sven, at that event. And obviously I can't say when it will be, but it will happen. So obviously, people could come along and hear you speak for it, in person. Just before we bring things together, just again invite if anybody else got any more questions for Sven. Anybody else got any comments, observations, anything they'd like to say? Quick shout out who else has jumped on. Keely Shooter, how are you? Anything you'd like to say? How can people connect with you, Sven? What's the best way for people to reach out to you? I think I've got your details on a little banner that I created here. So there's your website.
So that's basically a very straightforward. If you go to the contact page, you can actually schedule a call with me right there. There is a scheduling tool, so you can just choose a slot and just get yourself a discovery chat with me, so we can do this one-to-one. That's definitely the easiest way of getting in contact with me, by knowing it's going to happen because it's in my diary. But otherwise, feel free to just check out my website. I actually have an article on that website that I called "The Pandemic Sucks: How I Make the Most of It." You can basically read just the process, the 3 steps I said, in a more detail, to just also see my loss list. I put it in there for you to just see how long that list was, to realize like, oh wow, there is quite a lot of stuff going on, and many things you probably resonate with. But the other one thing, I want to just give people with them is, don't just go for the sound bites of "it's okay not to be okay," or everything's gonna be all right, and all those kind of weird sound bites. Don't just settle with those. Okay, emotions are energy states that really want you to move forward, and I want to encourage you to use your emotions, connect them to your logic, your mind, really learn, what are they saying about me? Who am I? Where do I go? What is really triggered within me? And then create plans and make decisions on the basis of what's going on inside you, not on what is going on around you. At my TEDx, I always said, the walls that limit you are not around you. They are inside you. And I am testimony. I know that for a fact. That's why the pandemic has been fairly easy for me, because I know my safety doesn't come from the world around me. It actually comes from the inside out. And please stay emotionally connected. Use the energy that's there and move forward.
Powerful words. Fantastic. I want to thank you so much for your time tonight, Sven. I know you're a busy man. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you as always. And I'm sure that people, even if they're not watching live right now, they'll watch it on a replay. Again, this is going out across my Facebook and YouTube channel every Wednesday. There obviously will be live. Obviously, you can replay it on my Facebook and on YouTube more or less straight away. So yeah, just a big thank you. Anything else you'd just like to say in closing before we wrap it up?
I just want to say thank you to you to have me, and stay emotionally connected.
Thanks, Sven. If you stay on the line for a moment, we'll have a quick chat after. But thanks so much, guys. Just a quick one. I'm trying to get my YouTube figures up. So if you wouldn't mind, Darren Stanton live on YouTube, subscribe, and look forward to seeing you next week, Wednesday, 8 p.m. for another fascinating guest. Take care. Have a great week. All the best.